A lone surfer is approached by a massive whale in distress. What the whale seeks changes the course of the day and lives. And if you cherish your family and love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and avoid 10 years of bad luck. The morning sun cast long shadows across Malibu Beach as Tyler methodically waxed his surfboard. His movements were precise and practiced, developed over years of dawn patrol sessions. The ocean stretched before him, a vast expanse of blue-green water that seemed to hold infinite possibilities. As he worked, his mind drifted to the countless mornings he'd spent sitting on his grandfather's weathered deck, listening to stories about the sea. His grandfather, a former marine biologist, had always spoken about the ocean with reverence. "The sea isn't just water, Tyler," he would say, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "It's the world's greatest library of life, and we're just beginning to read its first chapter." These words had shaped Tyler's worldview, leading him to pursue marine biology in college while maintaining his connection to the waves through surfing. The morning air carried the distinct scent of salt and seaweed, mingling with the coffee from his thermos. Tyler paused his preparation to observe the water conditions. Clean sets rolling in at consistent intervals, perfect for a morning session. The beach was quiet at this hour, save for a few dedicated surfers and early morning joggers. This was how he preferred it, before the crowds descended. His peaceful contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of a tourist group, their loud voices carrying across the sand. They were exactly the type of visitors that had become increasingly common in Malibu, more interested in social media photos than respecting the environment. Tyler watched as they set up their spot, carelessly dropping plastic water bottles and snack wrappers on the sand. One wrapper caught the wind, tumbling toward the water. Tyler moved to catch it, but another gust took it just out of reach. His jaw tightened as he watched it disappear into the surf. This was becoming a daily occurrence. People treating the beach like their personal garbage can, seemingly oblivious to the damage they were causing. He'd seen the effects firsthand during his volunteer work with local marine conservation groups. Seabirds tangled in plastic, fish trapped in discarded packaging, and entire coral reefs suffocating under layers of human waste. His grandfather's stories of pristine waters and abundant marine life seemed increasingly like fairy tales. Finally ready to enter the water, Tyler grabbed his board and began his paddle out. The water was cooler than expected, sending a slight shiver through his wetsuit. As he moved beyond the break, something felt different. The usual rhythm of the ocean seemed altered, as if the water itself was trying to communicate something. Looking down through the clear water, Tyler noticed a dark shape moving beneath him. His first thought was shark, but the movement pattern was wrong. The shape was too large, too deliberate in its motion. As it drew closer, his breath caught in his throat. Through the crystalline water, he could make out the unmistakable silhouette of a whale, moving with surprising grace for its enormous size. The sight filled him with awe, but also concern. Whales typically stayed in deeper waters, well beyond the surf break. Something had drawn this one unusually close to shore. As the massive creature moved beneath him, Tyler remained still, his heart pounding. Years of ocean experience told him something wasn't right, but he couldn't yet tell what. The whale's presence seemed to alter the entire atmosphere of the morning. The tourist group's loud voices faded into background noise. The sound of breaking waves dimmed, and Tyler found himself completely focused on the extraordinary creature below. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind. The ocean speaks to those who learn to listen. Right now, it seemed to be sending him a message he couldn't ignore. The moment of wonder quickly transformed into horror as the whale surfaced closer to Tyler's position. Through the clear water, he could now see the cruel lattice of fishing nets wrapped around its massive body. Industrial-grade nylon rope cut into the whale's skin, leaving angry red marks where it had struggled against its bonds. The creature's eyes, intelligent and desperate, met Tyler's with an intensity that made his chest tighten. The whale's breath came in labored bursts through its blowhole, each exhale carrying a note of distress that seemed to pierce the morning air. Tyler had seen injured marine life before during his conservation work, but nothing of this magnitude. The fishing net was extensive, probably commercial grade, the kind used by large fishing operations that often operated illegally in protected waters. Tyler turned quickly toward the beach, raising his arms and shouting for help. A group of surfers bobbed about 50 yards away, but they were focused on the incoming sets, their backs to him. The tourist group he'd noticed earlier were all focused on their phones, taking selfies against the sunrise. His calls echoed across the water, but no one seemed to notice or care. "Hey, I need help here," he shouted again, his voice growing hoarse. A few people glanced his way, but their expressions were dismissive. To them, he probably looked like another attention-seeking surfer. The irony wasn't lost on him. In a beach full of people documenting every moment of their lives, a genuine emergency was going completely unnoticed. The whale made another attempt to free itself, its movement creating a surge that rocked Tyler on his board. The netting tightened with each struggle, and Tyler could see it cutting deeper into the whale's skin. Time was running out. He knew enough about marine mammals to understand that the whale's panic would only increase, potentially leading to exhaustion or worse. Making a quick assessment of his resources, Tyler took inventory. He had his diving knife strapped to his ankle, standard equipment for any serious surfer in case of entanglement. His wetsuit would provide some protection against the cold water, but he had no other tools. The shore was too far to swim back for supplies, and he couldn't risk losing sight of the whale. The decision crystallized in his mind with surprising clarity. If no one else would help, he would have to act alone. It wasn't the first time he'd had to make a solo rescue. He'd helped entangled seals and sea lions before, but never anything of this scale. The whale was enormous, and one wrong move could be fatal. Tyler took several deep breaths, preparing himself mentally and physically for what he was about to do. His training in marine animal rescue kicked in, and he began running through the protocol in his head. First priority: assess the situation without adding to the animal's stress. Second, identify the key points where the netting could be cut to provide the most relief. Third, maintain a safe distance from the tail and fins, which could easily crush him if the whale panicked. Sliding off his surfboard, Tyler kept one hand on it while treading water. The whale seemed to sense his intent, its movements becoming slightly calmer. Years of interacting with marine life had taught him that these creatures could often sense human intentions. He hoped this one could understand he was trying to help. "I'm here," he said softly, more to steady himself than for the whale's benefit. "I'm going to help you." The words felt inadequate against the magnitude of the task ahead, but they helped center his resolve. Taking one final deep breath, Tyler dove beneath the surface, swimming toward the entangled giant with determined strokes. The reality of what he was attempting hit him as he drew closer. The whale was at least 40 feet long, its body a testa, meant to the majesty of marine life that his grandfather had always spoken about. Now, seeing it trapped and suffering, Tyler felt a surge of anger at the carelessness that had led to this situation. This was exactly what he'd been fighting against all these years: the casual disregard for marine life that treated the ocean as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. As Tyler dove deeper, the true complexity of the situation revealed itself. The fishing net wasn't just wrapped around the whale. It was anchored to a cluster of submerged rocks about 15 feet below the surface. The rocks, covered in sharp barnacles and sea growth, had created a natural snare that held the netting firmly in place. Every movement the whale made only served to tighten the entanglement further. The water temperature hit him first, much colder at this depth than on the surface. Even through his wetsuit, Tyler could feel the chill seeping into his muscles. He made a mental note to monitor his body temperature. Hypothermia could become a real concern if this rescue took too long. The pressure in his ears increased as he descended, forcing him to pause and equalize. His first close examination of the netting revealed a mess of industrial-grade poly rope, the kind used in commercial fishing operations. The main line was as thick as his wrist, with smaller mesh sections branching off in a complex web. Some sections had already begun to fray from the whale's struggles, creating a chaotic pattern that would make cutting through it even more challenging. Tyler reached for the knife strapped to his ankle, but his cold fingers fumbled with the clasp. Precious seconds ticked by as he struggled with it, his lungs already beginning to burn from holding his breath. Finally freeing the knife, he moved toward the first major knot, only to have his vision suddenly clouded by kicked-up sand as the whale shifted position. Forced to surface for air, Tyler broke through the waves, gasping. The cold was already affecting his coordination, making his movements slower than he'd like. He took several deep breaths, trying to calm his racing heart. The whale remained surprisingly still, as if understanding that movement would only make things worse. "You're doing great," he found himself saying to the massive creature, treading water nearby. "Just stay calm for me." The whale released a gentle spray from its blowhole, the sound oddly reassuring in the morning air. Tyler's grandfather had always said that whales were among the most intelligent creatures in the ocean. Right now, he needed that intelligence more than ever. Diving again, Tyler focused on the task with renewed determination. The technical aspects of marine rescue training kicked in. Look for the load-bearing lines first, the ones creating the most pressure. Cut those, and the rest would be easier to manage. But as he approached the main knot, his hands trembling slightly from the cold, doubt crept in. What if he cut the wrong line and made things worse? What if the whale panicked while he was down there? The consequences of a mistake at this depth, this close to such a powerful creature, could be fatal. The pressure of the situation bore down on him as heavily as the water above. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. "Respect the ocean, but never let fear stop you from doing what's right." The old man had spent decades studying marine life, documenting the increasing threats they faced from human activity. He'd passed that knowledge on to Tyler, along with a sense of responsibility to protect these creatures. Focusing on that thought, Tyler pressed forward. He positioned himself near the largest knot, bracing against a rock for leverage. The barnacles scraped against his wet suit as he worked, but he barely noticed the discomfort. All his attention was on the taut lines before him, identifying the crucial points where his cuts would have the most effect. The whale remained remarkably till its massive eye occasionally visible, watching his efforts. There was an intelligence in that gaze that Tyler couldn't ignore, an awareness that seemed to transcend the usual barriers between species. In that moment, he felt a profound connection to the creature, a shared understanding of the situation's gravity. Time seemed to slow underwater as Tyler worked methodically through the first series of knots. Each cut required careful consideration. Too shallow and the rope wouldn't give, too aggressive and he risked losing control of his knife in the current. The cold continued to seep into his muscles, making each movement more difficult than the last. After what felt like hours but was likely only minutes, Tyler's persistence finally paid off. The last major knot gave way under his knife, creating a chain reaction through the netting. The rope's tension, built up from countless hours of the whale's struggle, released in a sudden burst. The net began to unravel, sections floating away in the current like abandoned spider webs. Tyler kicked hard to avoid getting tangled in the loosened ropes, his lungs burning from the extended time underwater. As he cleared the immediate area, the whale seemed to sense its newfound freedom. Its massive body shifted, testing the waters around it with careful movements. Years of handling marine animals had taught Tyler to anticipate their reactions, but nothing had prepared him for what happened next. The whale began to move, slowly at first, shrugging off the remaining pieces of netting like an old coat. Its movements were deliberate, careful not to entangle itself again or harm Tyler in the process. The intelligence behind these actions was unmistakable. This wasn't just instinct, but calculated behavior. As the last of the netting fell away, the whale paused, hanging suspended in the blue depths. Breaking the surface for air, Tyler watched in amazement as the whale followed, rising with surprising grace for its enormous size. The morning sun caught the spray from its blowhole, creating a rainbow that arched briefly over the water. The whale's skin, now free from its bonds, gleamed wet and dark in the early light. Where the ropes had cut into its flesh, pale marks remained, battle scars that would eventually fade but never completely disappear. The whale's emergence drew attention from the beach. The previously disinterested tourists now had their phones out, recording the spectacle. The other surfers had stopped catching waves, watching instead as the massive creature celebrated its freedom. None of them knew the full story of what had just transpired beneath the waves, the desperate struggle that had led to this moment. In a display that seemed almost choreographed, the whale began to move. Its massive body curved through the water, building momentum. Tyler treaded water, watching in awe as the creature breached, launching itself skyward in a spectacular display of power and grace. Water cascaded off its body as it rotated slightly in the air, seeming to hang suspended for an impossible moment before crashing back into the ocean. The impact sent waves rippling across the surface, rocking Tyler's surfboard where it floated nearby. The beach erupted in cheers and applause, the crowd finally engaged but completely unaware of the drama that had preceded this moment. Their phones captured the spectacle, but missed the story behind it. The desperate struggle, the cold determination, the connection formed between rescuer and rescued. As the whale settled back into the water, it turned, its eye once again meeting Tyler's. There was something in that gaze that transcended species, a recognition, an acknowledgement. The creature moved closer, not threatening but deliberate, until it was near enough that Tyler could see the detailed patterns on its skin, the subtle variations in color that made each whale unique. The whale released a gentle spray from its blowhole, the mist catching the sunlight and creating another brief rainbow. It was almost as if the creature was putting on a show, not for the crowd on the beach, but for the one person who had risked everything to help it. The display lasted only moments, but it burned itself into Tyler's memory with crystal clarity. Finally, with a movement that seemed almost like a nod, the whale began to move away. Its powerful tail lifted once, sending a cascade of water into the air, before it slipped beneath the surface. Tyler watched as the dark shape moved steadily outward, toward deeper waters where it belonged. The whale's silhouette gradually faded into the blue depths, leaving behind only ripples and the memory of their shared experience. Tyler remained floating in the water, his body finally registering the exhaustion and cold from the rescue. The cheers from the beach continued, but they seemed distant, unimportant. What mattered was what had just happened. Not the spectacular show at the end, but the desperate struggle beneath the waves, the moment of connection between human and whale, the triumph of compassion over indifference. In the days following the whale rescue, Tyler couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to do more. The incident had crystallized something in his mind. The random nature of his intervention had been lucky, but luck wasn't enough to protect marine life. During his morning surf sessions, he began documenting the amount of debris washing up on shore, taking photographs and noting patterns in the types of waste he found. His apartment's living room gradually transformed into an impromptu command center. Maps of local ocean currents covered one wall, marked with red pins indicating where he'd found significant debris clusters. His coffee table disappeared under stacks of marine conservation reports and local environmental regulations. The more he researched, the clearer it became that the whale's entanglement wasn't an isolated incident. Tyler approached the local surf shop first, thinking fellow surfers would be natural allies in ocean conservation. The shop owner, Mike, listened politely but shook his head. "Look, man, everyone loves the ocean, but people come here to have fun, not to get lectured about trash." The dismissal stung, but it also strengthened Tyler's resolve. He'd witnessed firsthand what having fun without responsibility could lead to. At the weekly surfers meetup, Tyler tried again. Standing before the group, wetsuit still dripping from the morning session, he described his vision for a local preservation initiative. "We're out there every day," he argued. "We see what's happening to our beach. We could organize regular cleanups, document problem areas, maybe even set up an alert system for marine life in distress." The response was lukewarm at best. Some surfers shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Others checked their phones or whispered among themselves. One veteran surfer, Pete, finally spoke up. "We get it, Tyler. You saved a whale. That's awesome, but we're not all trying to be marine activists. Some of us just want to catch waves." The resistance surprised him. These were people who claimed to love the ocean, who spent countless hours riding its waves. Yet when faced with the opportunity to protect it, they retreated into comfortable apathy, Their reaction reminded him of the tourists who had ignored his calls for help during the whale rescue. Undeterred, Tyler began reaching out to local environmental groups. Many were already overwhelmed with existing projects, their limited resources stretched thin. However, his persistence began to attract attention from unexpected quarters. A marine biology student named Sarah reached out after hearing about the whale rescue. A retired Coast Guard officer, Marcus, offered to share his experience with marine emergencies. During a particularly frustrating day, when another attempt to organize a beach cleanup fell through, Tyler found himself sitting on his grandfather's old deck. The weather would still held the imprints of countless conversations about ocean conservation. The hardest part isn't fighting the problem, his grandfather had once told him. It's fighting the indifference. Those words resonated differently now. Tyler realized he'd been approaching the situation with the same urgency he'd felt during the whale rescue. But not everyone had experienced that moment of connection, that visceral understanding of what was at stake. He needed to help others see what he had seen, feel what he had felt. Taking out his phone, Tyler created a simple group chat, Malibu Ocean Guardians. He added Sarah and Marcus, then wrote a message, meeting this Saturday. Small group, big goals. Who's in? The responses came quickly, just a handful of people, but each one committed to making a difference. They needed to start somewhere. Tyler began sketching out plans for their first meeting, drawing on his experience in marine biology and conservation. The whale rescue had shown him what one person could do in a crisis. Now it was time to see what a dedicated group could accomplish with proper planning and purpose. The tourist crowds continued to fill the beach each day, leaving their usual trail of debris. But now, Tyler looked at them differently. They weren't the enemy. They were potential allies who just needed to understand what was at stake. Each piece of trash left on the sand, each net abandoned in the water, was an opportunity to educate and inspire change. The community center's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the faces of the dozen people who showed up for the first Malibu Ocean Guardians meeting. Tyler stood at the front of the room, his presentation ready on his laptop. The slides showed clear evidence, photographs of debris-strewn beaches, data on marine animal injuries, and maps of pollution hotspots along the coastline. This isn't just about one whale, Tyler began, clicking through images of marine life harmed by ocean waste. Our beach had 37 reported incidents of marine animal entanglement last year alone. That's just what was reported. We estimate the actual number is 3 times higher. The statistics drew concerned murmurs from some attendees, but others seemed more interested in the free coffee and donuts at the back of the room. As Tyler moved to discuss action plans, the door swung open. Jake Morrison strode in, followed by several other local surfers. Jake was well known in the Malibu surf scene, sponsored by several major brands and featured regularly in surfing magazines. He carried himself with the easy confidence of someone used to being the center of attention. "Sorry we're late," Jake announced, not sounding sorry at all. "Wouldn't want to miss the lecture on how we're all killing the ocean." A few of his followers chuckled. Tyler recognized the tactical nature of this interruption. Jake hadn't come to support the cause. He'd come to undermine it. Maintaining his composure, Tyler continued with his presentation, outlining a 3-phase plan for beach conservation. Regular cleanup events, documentation of problem areas, and coordination with local authorities to enforce existing environmental regulations. The plan was practical, achievable, and based on successful programs from other coastal communities. Jake's hand shot up during the discussion of funding needs. "So, let me get this straight," he drawled, leaning back in his chair. "You want us to spend our weekends picking up other people's trash, document everything like we're some kind of ocean police, and probably scare away half the tourists who keep our local businesses alive?" His words carried weight. Many local shops depended on tourist traffic for survival. "We're not trying to scare anyone away," Tyler responded evenly. "We're trying to protect what brings them here in the first place. A clean ocean benefits everyone: surfers, tourists, marine life. Local businesses." He clicked to a slide showing the economic impact of beach closures due to pollution. One bad incident can shut down tourism for weeks. But Jake wasn't finished. "You know what else scares away tourists? Activist groups making them feel guilty about having a good time. Not everyone wants to turn their beach day into an environmental crusade. Several heads nodded in agreement, and Tyler felt the room's energy shifting. The meeting continued, but the damage was done. Jake had successfully planted seeds of doubt, framing ocean conservation as a threat to local prosperity rather than its protector. When Tyler called for volunteers to lead different initiatives, only a handful of people raised their hands: Sarah, Marcus, and a few others who had been supportive from the start. As people filed out after the meeting, Jake lingered behind. "Nice presentation," he said, his tone carrying a hint of mockery. "Real professional. But here's the thing. People come to Malibu to escape their problems, not to solve them. Maybe focus more on riding waves and less on saving them." He left before Tyler could respond, his words hanging in the air like salt spray. Sarah approached as Tyler packed up his laptop. "Don't let him get to you," she said. "Jake's got influence, but he doesn't speak for everyone. We still have our core group." She was right, but Tyler couldn't shake the feeling that something about Jake's opposition felt personal, almost calculated. The small group that remained gathered around Tyler, their commitment unchanged by Jake's interference. They might be fewer in number than hoped, but their determination had only grown stronger. Tyler looked at their faces. Sarah with her marine biology expertise, Marcus with his years of Coast Guard experience, and several others who shared his vision for a cleaner ocean. "So," Tyler addressed his loyal supporters, "are we ready to get to work?" Their responses were immediate and unanimous. Jake might have won this round in terms of numbers, but he'd also helped identify who was truly committed to the cause. Sometimes, Tyler reflected, opposition had a way of clarifying what and who really mattered. The first beach cleanup organized by the Malibu Ocean Guardian started at dawn on a Saturday morning. Tyler arrived early to set up supplies: garbage bags, gloves, clipboards for documentation, and a folding table with water bottles for volunteers. He'd expected at least 20 people based on email responses. Only 8 showed up. Sarah helped him divide the small group into teams, each assigned to different sections of the beach. They developed a cataloging system to track the types of waste they found: plastic bottles, fishing gear, food packaging, and other categories. The data would help identify patterns and potential sources of the pollution. "Found another one," Marcus called out, holding up a tangled mass of fishing nets similar to what had trapped the whale. The discovery hit Tyler hard, a reminder of how common these hazards were. They'd already collected 3 similar nets in just 2 hours. Each one represented a potential death trap for marine life. The morning sun climbed higher, and the regular beach crowds began to arrive. Some tourists stopped to watch the cleanup effort, but most walked past, carefully avoiding eye contact. A few even dropped trash mere feet from where volunteers were working. Tyler felt his frustration rising, but kept it in check. This was about progress, not perfection. Around midday, they encountered their first major obstacle. A group of beachgoers had set up directly in their cleanup zone, spreading out towels and umbrellas over areas they hadn't yet searched. When Sarah politely asked them to move temporarily, they refused. "We have as much right to be here as you do," one man declared, turning up his music in response. The situation deteriorated further when they discovered a large debris field hidden behind me rocks. The mess looked deliberate. Dozens of bottles and cans arranged almost like a party site. As they began cleaning it up, Tyler noticed fresh footprints leading away from the area. Someone was actively working against their efforts. Despite the challenges, the team's spirit remained strong. They documented everything meticulously: photographs, GPS coordinates, types and quantities of waste collected. By early afternoon, they had filled 23 garbage bags. The physical evidence of their work was undeniable, even if the beach already showed signs of new litter appearing. During their lunch break, Tyler gave an impromptu speech to his tired volunteers. "Look at what we've accomplished in just one morning," he said, gesturing to the pile of collected waste. "Each piece we removed is one less threat to marine life." This isn't just about cleaning up, it's about showing others what's possible when people take action. The team's enthusiasm renewed. They tackled the afternoon with fresh energy. But as they worked their way down the beach, they made a disturbing discovery. Behind a cluster of rocks, partially buried in sand, lay a massive tangle of commercial fishing nets. This wasn't random debris. This was industrial waste, deliberately dumped. Marcus examined the netting with his experienced eye. "This is recent," he declared, "and it's not the kind used by local fishing boats. Someone's dumping commercial gear here." The discovery added a new dimension to their mission. They weren't just dealing with careless tourists and occasional litter bugs. There was an organized source of pollution. Sarah began photographing and documenting the find while Tyler and Marcus worked to remove the netting. It was heavy, waterlogged, and partially buried in the sand. As they struggled with it, Tyler noticed several people watching from a distance. One of them looked familiar, one of Jake's regular surfing companions. But when Tyler tried to get a better look, the observer quickly disappeared. The sun was setting by the time they finished processing the commercial netting. Their final count for the day was impressive. 32 bags of general waste, 5 tangled fishing nets, hundreds of pieces of microplastic, and detailed documentation of it all. But the discovery of the commercial netting weighed heavily on Tyler's mind. Something bigger was happening here, something that went beyond casual littering. As the team packed up their supplies, Tyler shared his concerns with Sarah and Marcus. "This isn't random," he said quietly. "Someone's using our beach as a dumping ground, and I'm starting to think they don't want us looking too closely at why." The others nodded grimly. What had started as a simple beach cleanup initiative was evolving into something more complex and potentially more dangerous. The Surf for Conservation competition took shape over 3 weeks of intense planning. Tyler secured permits, arranged for local sponsors, and designed a format that would combine competitive surfing with environmental awareness. Each heat would begin with competitors spending 15 minutes collecting beach debris. Points would be awarded for both surfing skills and conservation efforts. The morning of the event arrived with perfect conditions: clean 3 to 5 foot swells and light offshore winds. Colorful banners lined the beach, and a small stage housed the judging panel and announcement system. Local news had picked up the story, sending a camera crew to cover what they called a new approach to competitive surfing. Registration exceeded expectations, with 32 surfers signing up. Most were locals, including several of Jake's usual crowd, which made Tyler uneasy. Jake himself arrived late, swaggering through the crowd with his sponsored surfboard under his arm. His presence drew attention from the photographers, who recognized the local surf celebrity. "Interesting format you've got here," Jake commented. Ed loudly during the pre-competition briefing, turning surfers into garbage collectors. Real dignified. A few people snickered, but others shot him disapproving looks. The environmental message was resonating with more people than he'd expected. The first few heats ran smoothly. Competitors embraced the format, some even making a show of their cleanup efforts for the cameras. The crowd grew as the morning progressed, with spectators genuinely engaged in both aspects of the competition. Tyler began to feel that his vision of combining sport with conservation might actually work. During the 4th heat, Sarah noticed something odd. "Tyler," she called from her position at the judging table, "look at the water around the competition zone." Dark patches had appeared in the lineup, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. As they watched, the patches grew larger, and a faint chemical smell reached the beach. Before Tyler could investigate, Jake's heat began. The defending local champion paddled out with 3 other surfers, but instead of participating in the cleanup portion, he began surfing immediately. When the announcer reminded him of the rules, Jake made a show of picking up a single piece of trash, then threw it back into the water with a theatrical gesture. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some laughed, others booed. But Tyler's attention was fixed on Jake's unusual lineup position. He seemed to be deliberately staying away from the dark patches in the water, as if he knew something about them. The other competitors, less familiar with the break, unknowingly paddled through the contaminated areas. One of the younger competitors, a 16-year-old local named Danny, suddenly called out in distress. His skin had begun to react to whatever was in the water, turning red and blotchy where it had made contact. The heat was immediately suspended as lifeguards moved in to assist. Marcus, watching from shore, grabbed Tyler's arm. "That's chemical dumping," he said grimly. "I've seen this before during my Coast Guard days. Someone's trying to sabotage your event." The implications hit Tyler hard. This wasn't just about competition anymore. This was deliberate endangerment. Emergency protocols kicked in, the water was cleared, and the competition was temporarily halted. Medical personnel attended to Danny and two other surfers who had shown similar reactions. The news crew, sensing a bigger story, began interviewing affected participants and filming the contaminated water. Through it all, Jake maintained an air of casual indifference, but Tyler noticed something else in his expression, a flicker of guilt, quickly masked by his usual bravado. When their eyes met across the beach, Jake quickly looked away, engaging in animated conversation with his entourage as if to avoid any possibility of confrontation. The competition never resumed that day. Environmental health officials arrived to take water samples, and the beach was temporarily closed. What should have been a celebration of ocean conservation had turned into a glaring example of why such efforts were desperately needed. As the crowd dispersed and officials cordoned off the affected area, Tyler gathered his core team. The sabotage was obvious, but proving it would be another matter entirely. One thing was certain: someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to disrupt their event, and they needed to find out why. The week following the competition incident became a blur of official meetings and investigations. Environmental health reports confirmed what Marcus had suspected. Industrial chemicals had been deliberately released into the surf zone. The concentration suggested a coordinated dump, not an accidental spill. Tyler and Sarah spent hours reviewing footage from the event, studying Jake's suspicious behavior. His precise avoidance of the contaminated areas couldn't be coincidence. When they examined earlier footage from their beach cleanups, they noticed a pattern. Certain areas of the beach were consistently more polluted than others, and these areas aligned with specific access points along the coast. "Look at this," Sarah said one evening, spreading out their documentation maps. "The commercial fishing nets we've been finding? They're all showing up within a half-mile radius of these 3 coves." She circled the locations with a red marker. And guess who owns the only private access road to those coves? Tyler leaned in to examine the property records she'd pulled up on her laptop. The road belonged to Pacific Coast Processing, a seafood processing company with a facility just inland. The company name triggered a memory. He'd seen their logo on one of the trucks parked near Jake's usual spot at Dawn Patrol. Their investigation took them to the harbor, where Marcus's connections with the Coast Guard proved invaluable. A harbor master who owed Marcus a favor shared some interesting information. Pacific Coast Processing had recently been cited for multiple violations, including improper disposal of fishing gear and processing waste. But somehow, the citations had disappeared from official records. "They're paying someone off," Marcus concluded grimly. "Question is, how high up does it go?" The implications were disturbing. If a company could simply buy its way out of environmental violations, what else were they capable of? Tyler decided to conduct surveillance of the suspicious coves. For 3 nights, he and Sarah took shifts photographing activity along the private access road. On the second night, they witnessed something troubling. Trucks arriving well after midnight, their contents obscured by dark tarps. The vehicles would disappear down the access road and return empty an hour later. The pattern repeated each night, but it was on the 3rd night that they got their breakthrough. A familiar car appeared just before the trucks, Jake's distinctive red Jeep. He appeared to be acting as a lookout, positioning himself at the road's entrance and making calls on his cell phone. "We need to get closer," Tyler whispered to Sarah as they watched from their hiding spot. But before they could move, headlights swept across their position. They'd been spotted. A vehicle quickly approached their location, forcing them to retreat hastily through the brush. The next morning, Tyler found his car's tires slashed in the beach parking lot. A note had been wedged under his windshield wiper. "Some things are better left alone." The threat was clear, but it only confirmed they were on the right track. Sarah discovered through public records that Pacific Coast Processing had recently expanded its operations, coinciding with the increase in ocean dumping. But the company's official waste disposal records showed suspiciously low numbers. Either they'd found an incredibly efficient way to process waste, or they were disposing of it illegally. The evidence was building, but they needed something concrete, something that couldn't be explained away or buried in bureaucracy. Tyler remembered his grandfather's words about documentation being the key to environmental justice. They needed irrefutable proof of the connection between the company, the dumping, and Jake's involvement. Late one afternoon, as Tyler was reviewing their evidence at the beach, he noticed Jake watching him from a distance. Something in his former rival's posture seemed different, less confident, more conflicted. When their eyes met this time, Jake didn't immediately look away. Instead, he took a step forward, as if wanting to speak, before apparently thinking better of it and turning away. That brief interaction nagged at Tyler. Jake's behavior suggested internal conflict, possibly even guilt. There was more to this story than simple environmental negligence. Something had turned the local surf champion into an accomplice in environmental crimes, and Tyler was determined to find out what it was. The next day, Tyler found an unmarked envelope in his mailbox. Inside was a single key card with Pacific Coast Processing's logo and a handwritten note. Loading dock midnight. Call me alone. The handwriting matched Jake's signature from the competition registration form. At 11:45 p.m., Tyler parked his car several blocks from Pacific Coast Processing's facility. He'd informed Sarah and Marcus of his location and arranged for them to contact authorities if they didn't hear from him by 1 a.m. The loading dock area was poorly lit, with only a few security lights casting long shadows across the empty parking lot. The key card worked, granting him access to a side entrance. The facility's interior smelled of fish and industrial cleaners. Tyler followed the dim emergency lighting until he reached the main processing floor. The sound of approaching footsteps made him duck behind a stack of crates. "I know you're here," Jake's voice echoed through the space. "You can come out." Tyler emerged slowly, scanning for any sign of a trap. But Jake was alone, looking unexpectedly vulnerable under the harsh industrial lighting. Gone was his usual swagger, replaced by visible exhaustion. "Why did you call me here?" Tyler demanded, keeping his distance. Jake ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that reminded Tyler suddenly, sharply, of his grandfather. The resemblance was uncanny now that he was looking for it. "Because I can't keep doing this," Jake replied, pulling out a folder. "But before I show you everything, you need to understand why." He took a deep breath. "Your grandfather, our grandfather, he wasn't just some random environmentalist. He was building a case against Pacific Coast Processing 20 years ago." The revelation hit Tyler like a physical blow. "Our grandfather? What are you talking about?" But even as he asked, pieces began falling into place. Jake's age, his familiar mannerisms, the personal nature of his antagonism. "Mom never told me about him until she was dying," Jake continued. "She left home young, changed her name, tried to forget everything. But at the end, she told me about her father, about his fight against this company, about her younger brother, who'd never known he had a sister." Documents spilled from Jake's folder, old photographs, letters, legal papers. Tyler saw his grandfather's familiar handwriting on research notes dating back decades. "The company bought people's silence," Jake explained. "They threatened families' careers. Mom ran because she was scared. When I started surfing professionally, they approached me, offered sponsorship, money, connections. I didn't know then what I was getting into." Tyler examined a photo showing his grandfather with a young woman, Jake's mother, his aunt, standing on the same beach where he'd rescued the whale. "Why tell me this now?" "Because history's repeating itself," Jake replied, producing a USB drive. "This contains everything: shipping records, disposal logs, payoff documents. The chemical dump at your competition? That was supposed to be a warning, but they're escalating. They're talking about more permanent solutions." The implications chilled Tyler. His grandfather's mysterious death years ago suddenly appeared in a new light. "We need to take this to the authorities." "It's not that simple," Jake warned. "They have people everywhere." "That's why I dash." A sudden noise from above cut him off. Security lights flooded the space as figures emerged from multiple doorways. "How disappointing," a new voice announced. Howard Chun, Pacific Coast Processing CEO, stepped into view. "We gave you every chance, Jake. Just like we gave your mother a chance years ago." Several large men moved to block the exits. In the tense moments that followed, Tyler saw Jake's hand move subtly toward his pocket. Understanding flashed between them. The kind of unspoken communication that sometimes exists between family, even family that's just met. The USB drive had already been uploaded to a cloud server. This confrontation was just a distraction. You know what happens now? Chin continued, but Tyler wasn't listening. He was watching Jake, seeing his grandfather's determination in his cousin's eyes. They were no longer rivals but allies, united by a shared legacy and purpose. The truth would come out this time, not just about the environmental crimes, but about a family torn apart by corporate greed, about a grandfather's fight carried forward through two grandsons who hadn't known they were fighting the same battle from opposite sides. The ocean had brought them together, just as it had once divided their family. In that moment, Tyler understood that saving the whale had been just the beginning. The real rescue of the truth, of his family's legacy, of the ocean itself, was only now taking shape. And this time, he wasn't fighting alone.